Meeting of the City of Meridian Solid Waste Advisory Committee. It is Wednesday, August 22nd. It is now 3 minutes after 4, and we'll proceed with the roll call. Indicate if you are present. Cheryl Caldwell is absent. Mark Nelson?
Here.
Steve Corey? Here. Carrie Glenn? Here. Dave Neal?
Here.
Megan Larson?
Here.
Andrea Pogue?
Here.
Scott Walters?
Here.
Victoria Madrigal?
Here.
Ex officio members, Councilwoman Genesis Maya?
Here.
And Rochelle Klein? Here. Quorum being present, we will now move to consideration of the agenda. The proposed agenda was sent out before the meeting, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at it.
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved as written. Additional comments? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote, all those in favor of approving the proposed agenda as written signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is consideration of the proposed minutes for the July 25th meeting. All those were also sent out before the meeting, so do any of the commissioners have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, are there copies here today? Are there meeting minute copies here today, or no?
Yes.
Oh, in the back?
I do not know, but if, yeah.
I just missed that meeting, so thank you.
I was here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Commission members, any comments or motions?
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the July 25th minutes as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the proposed minutes for the July 25th meeting be approved as written. Further comments? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote. All those in favor of approving the proposed minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is going into old business. And the first item under the old business is Community Recycling Fund, the Household Hazardous Waste Program refund. Carrie, could you?
I handed everybody the balance sheet for the recycling fund. The last deposit, or the most recent deposit, was a little over $26,000 for household hazardous waste overage. I went back. Part of the rate review and last meeting's discussion pointed out that there was basically an overcharge per household on the hazardous waste compared to what we were charging the customer versus what the expenses were. So we went back to Republic Services, between Rita, the controller, and Republic Services, they went back to October 2015, calculated the overage, and that's where the refund of $26,000 has come in. That's through May of this year, so we would still see possibly a little bit more for this year. And with that overage, part of this updated rate discussion for the CPI will reflect a reduction in the HSW line item. But that'll be further down the agenda, but for now, here's the most recent balance for our recycling fund.
Very good news. Thank you. Members of the commission, do you have questions or comments about Carrie's presentation? Sensing the commission is comfortable with that, we'll move on to the next item. Recycle a bicycle purchase of SWAC banners update. Again, Carrie?
The banners, Cheryl has got the banners. I've got them right here. There was two exact measurements, but however you get the approval for. So it has been paid for.
Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments on? Thank you, Carrie, for taking care of that. And we'll move on to the next item, which is the Hefty Energy Bag Program. Dave Miles.
Chair.
Yes.
Just a quick update. We're in progress and on schedule with the Hefty Energy Bag Program rollout for Meridian. We are entering currently in the registration period, outreach component period, I should say. Registration begins on August 27th at 12 p.m. noon. So we're progressing through outreach right now to make sure that the citizens in the community are aware that that registration period occurs. We've had numerous social media posts. We've had press releases as well. And so we've gotten a lot of feedback. We've examined our website hits. We've got about 1,100 hits so far on the website, so we know that traffic's communicating back and forth. We think we're doing a reasonable job on the outreach in that component. We are currently in budget with our purchases. We've purchased the bags. They are actually on the facility here, so we've got them ready to go. We're working through the print materials to get those developed. So our anticipation in our timeline, again, is August 27th registration through September 10th. And then we would begin distribution to those 1,500 households beginning September 11th, which is a Tuesday. We'd conduct that period of handout for approximately 2 weeks. It ends I believe, the last week of September, but we can get those dates for you as well. And that's currently where we're at, and be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments in relation to that presentation?
Mr. Chairman, and are you going to keep a list of who? I just was thinking on the data recording or reporting, we have to report. Are you going to keep a list of who gets them?
Yes, so we have a registration database. We'll be keeping track of all that. Again, it's first come, first serve, so we've got 1,500 kits. So presuming we have 1,500 registrations or more, we'll have the list of who's registered. Again, you have to be a Meridian resident, and it's one role per household, so we'll have that data.
Perfect, thank you.
And just to make my thanks on this, when in my utility bill for this month, I found the announcement that the program was rolling out. So thanks to utility billing and to Public Works for getting that note into the bill. Who knows who reads what, but at least there is information going out to the citizens. So thank you for that step. Members of the commission, further comments or questions? Sensing none, thank you, David. That moves us to new business. And the first item under new business is the continued item that we had from last month, Republic Services Annual CPI Rate Adjustment Report. Rodney, I suspect you're probably picking it up from where we had left it.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Continuing our discussion on the CPI increase for trash services in City of Meridian. The discussion last time centered around the Household Hazardous Waste Program and whether or not that should have a CPI increase added to that or not. And discussion was subsequent discussions with staff was that should not, so that reduced our ask by 1 penny. As Carrie Glenn has alluded to, there was a refund of $26,000 to the City of Meridian for the previous 3 years' collection, so reconciled with with Rita, and on the household counts, and got that delivered to the city. The other piece of that, so that brings the increase for residential households to 40 cents in the CPI portion of that. On the last paragraph of the document you have there describes the recycling service charge that we're asking for. Our contract allows for increases in uncontrollable costs, and the recycling market is a variable market, and it's also an increasing state for our costs. During the period of July last year to the current year, July through June of this year, Republic Services sustained $325,000 in losses as it relates to the Meridian City Recycling Program. We're asking for that in the rates for both residential and commercial. In addition to that, we are we've worked with a vendor and pushed off increases that they've had. And those are going to go into effect on October the 1st, and that's another $73,000 on top of that. So we're asking for those two pieces, and then the third piece of that is the City of Meridian bills Republic Services a franchise fee of 6% based on everything that bills to our customers. So all those components are added into the rates. So on residential, in addition to the 40 cents, is another 83 cents. And then on commercial, in addition to the CPI, is another 76 cents per yard. So residential total increase is $1.24. So that run rate, or what we've requested here, is actually $155,000 below the current run rate. So we calculate our losses and we continue to see how they're acting. So those losses represent what we've had over the last 12 months, but our current losses in the last quarter are indicating that they're closer to $475,000. So a much larger loss than what we're asking for here is anticipated. So we anticipate coming back again next year for additional costs. The rates that you have behind there reflect everything on the front sheet. So the document that's been reviewed by Carrie and by Rita has added to it a recycling column that you'll see there on the 2019 side that reflects the letter and what's on top of that. That's your presentation.
Thank you. And that kind of takes us through two issues, which is good.
Okay.
I think what we got on this agenda item right now is the CPI increase that we were talking about before, and the remainder of the discussions about the recycling cost recovery actions. That's the next item on the agenda. So
Okay.
right now, members of the commission, what we're talking about is the CPI increase that we were talking about before and the adjustment to the household hazardous waste portion of it. And we'll get to the third item in the next action. So, members of the commission, do you have any questions for Rodney at this point on his presentation? Yes, Dave.
Would the questions just be regarding the annual CPI rate adjustment or both?
Both the annual CPI adjustment for what has been in place and the adjustments to the household hazardous waste. But yeah, if you would hold your questions on the recycling issues to the next item, that would be helpful for us to stay on task. Go ahead, Dave.
I do have one question.
Commissioner Neal?
I know things are different between entities, cities, different cities who are your clients in the county. Is this CPI rate increase pretty much reflective of what you are requesting of your other clients?
Yes, so the rates are quite a bit higher this year as we roll into the middle part of the year, where CPI has come up over 3% now. We haven't seen that since 2008. The City of Meridian is allowed a 90% of that, so 10% of that's dropped. So that net there, 328 is what we're asking for, is 90% of the total change. But it is reflective of similar rates that we're seeing in the other cities.
Again, Mr. Chairman and Rodney, are all of your clients, the cities and the county, are they all tied to CPI, or is there another process that some of them follow?
Yes. So, Commissioner Neal, all the other cities except Boise City are on a CPI. Most of them are using the same CPI that we're using here in Meridian. City of Boise is is a reimbursement contract. So we negotiate or we review financials with the city of Boise. We do that annually and adjust rates accordingly. But this increase is in line. What we're asking for here is in line with what we've asked for from the city of Boise and what they've granted.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, you mentioned earlier that even with the increase you're asking for from the city now, you'll still be not making up your losses already. Where would you stand if you included the other rate increases from the other cities as well?
Commissioner Magro, I'm sorry for butchering your name, but great question. It would be an additional 40 cents to cover the full cost in the current run rate that we're seeing. As I said, it's variable, so that's what we're seeing in the last quarter. We'll see. Time will tell whether it goes up or down.
Members of the commission, additional questions?
Mr. Chair,
Andrea?
do you
Or
have a
well,
question?
Ronnie, so this particular spreadsheet that is presented, this is the first time I've seen it as well. So I mean, I understand it's just the columns, but it sounds like if I understood you correctly, there's even another element in here, the 6% franchise fee you've now incorporated in here. So all of these years, the 6% has never been already incorporated into your charges?
So, Commissioner Glenn, this franchise fee is included, is buried in the rest of everything that's been there all along, and there's been no change to that.
Okay.
The only 6% franchise fee we're talking about is the incremental piece on this charge. So with an 80-cent increase, we're talking about a nickel in franchise fee associated with that. So
Okay,
to actually recover our costs, we have to add a franchise fee to that component.
Okay, okay.
But
So
not
it's
to
just
the
the
rest
one
of it.
component, not the entire
Nothing
spreadsheet.
else,
Okay.
just the recycling piece we're asking for. It's already on the rest of it.
Mr. Chair, so Commissioner Glenn, could you explain that for us? I'm not following.
Well, my concern was when you had mentioned the 6%, I thought that they were looking at increasing all of the rates an additional 6% to cover the franchise fee. And so he just clarified that 6% is in the rates already. So the 83% or the 83 cents that he's got listed here for recycling in the recycling column on residential, that includes the 6% for that particular line item as well.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Glenn, Mr. Remling, Mr. Chair, so when I'm looking at this spreadsheet, it looks different because of this additional column. It says recycling, 83 cents. So I'm trying to figure out, is that just collection?
That's associated, the 83 cents is to cover the cost associated with the disposal of that product. So we're actually paying for the product. It's not going to a landfill, but it is being recycled, but there's a cost to it now. So it's no longer a commodity. So we're paying, we've got a net negative situation in the market. And then in addition, we've got additional cost to process. So that 83 cents includes the franchise fee, the processing costs, and the change in the market that we've seen over the last year.
Okay. So in your report at the bottom, it says the total proposed increase for residential customers is $1.24. Here it says 83 cents. I know this is a topic for later in the agenda, but can you just clarify?
So the $1.24 includes the full increase. It includes the 83 cents and the CPI, the full increase. So you've got CPI on service, you've got CPI on rent, and you've got the recycling service. So that's where the $1.24 comes in. Those three pieces.
So, Mr. Chair,
Continue.
for the purposes of the CPI adjustment on current fees and services, where is the cost for collection for us to look at for recycling? And its related CPI adjustment.
Okay. Chairman Pogue, there are two columns. They're in red. CPI service, 40 cents, 40.1 cents. CPI rent, 4 cents. That's the $1.20. That's the dollar. Excuse me. That is the 44 cents associated with the CPI. I said 40. I misspoke in my letter. I said 40. It's 40 cents on the service. It's another 4 cents on the rent. So it's really 44. It's a good catch.
Didn't mean to catch it. I just wanted to understand if I can. So, Mr. Chair, just another follow-up.
Continue.
question. I'm trying to figure out the cost of curbside recycling collection service of that 2018 current. Is the cost of recycling collection embedded in that? And can you tell us what that is?
It is embedded in that, and we do not break that out. It's the total service of providing both those carts, both trucks that service that. That is not broken out anywhere. We have an internal allocation that approximates, but I don't have a number that I would give you that says this is the cost of the recycling program.
Rodney, I'm looking at the last page of your presentation.
Okay.
And should I be seeing a $1.24 difference between the FY 2018 rate and the FY 2019 rate? In which case, I'm seeing $1.
I'm sorry, you're on which page?
The very last page of the present, or I guess the second to the last.
There we go.
Sorry, second to
That's
the
okay.
last.
So page 5?
Mine aren't numbered. But, well,
Yes, there is. Yeah, you should be seeing $1.24. So
Okay.
I can modify that and email that back to you. Those are the current rates at the bottom. Or excuse me, those are proposed rates: 1938, 1738, and 1538. The rates for the previous year should be 1814, 1614, and 1838. So there's a formula error in the upper portion of that. So the current year rates are correct. The prior year rates are misstated by 24 cents. And it's going to be household hazardous waste getting picked up in there twice.
okay. So the first line service cost, we reduce that by the 24 because the 24 is broken out for the household hazardous waste. Okay. 24. Which gets us to the $1.24. Okay, thank you. But the engineer in me, all I need is an explanation for the discrepancies. Members of the commission, additional questions for Rodney? Thank you, Rodney. We'll go ahead and
Thank you, commissioners.
So, reminder again, the only portion that's on the table at this particular point is the household hazardous waste and the CPI adjustment methodology. Members of the commission, additional comments or motions? And this is kind of obviously where we're going at this point would be if we feel that this information is complete enough to be handed on to City Council for their consideration. And or if we have a do pass or don't pass recommendation to go on with that. But anyway, additional comments by the members of the commission?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose holding off on a motion until we hear the presentation on 5B2. Given that this spreadsheet includes recycling column and data, that I wouldn't want to approve this as is without hearing that presentation. So I'm uncomfortable. It's the first time Commissioner Glenn is seeing it with this data on it. I think that I would just propose waiting to hear everything related to the topic and then figure out where the commission wants to go.
And that's certainly viable too, that, once we get through the next item, we can go ahead and consider both items together. Additional comments by the commission?
Mr. Chair, I would echo that. It's my recollection from our last meeting that our idea was to present a single recommendation to council with recycling and CPI together.
And my only, certainly laying on the table the opportunity to not confuse or lose the issue. And if everyone's comfortable with this, then this all works out very well too. Additional comments or questions by the commission?
Mr. Commissioner, you'd mentioned some discrepancies that caught your eye. Is that something that needs to be updated prior to moving forward?
Yes. But I have an idea, having mentioned it, that the package that goes to City Council would be updated. So I don't think we need to, I think having mentioned it probably will result in the package being corrected. So we don't need to make a motion above and beyond.
We could include that in our motion.
Yes. Any further comments on these two items? Sensing the commission is ready to go ahead and move on to the next item, so we can go ahead and consider the whole thing. The next item is consideration of, in particular, Public Works Department's report on the recycle processing fee request, the third item that was in Rodney's report. David, I guess you're going to go ahead and present on that.
Mr. Chair. So we've spent some time with Republic Services as well as staff just looking over data about the request, what we call the Republic Services recycling fee request. So I'll give you a quick update on that. I've got about 10 slides, a few introductory slides just to refresh our memory as to what's occurred over the past year or so, so that everybody's on the same page. As everybody knows, or maybe not, recycling in the United States quite a large activity. Most of that material is exported out of our country. Over the last few years, it's been the 6th largest export out of the United States to China has been recyclable material. So just to give you the magnitude of what we're talking about so that everybody understands. Throughout the last 4 or 5 years, you've also seen changes in the world markets. In 2013, as I'm sure the Commission's aware, was known as China's Green Fence Initiative, which was a level in an effort to increase the number of inspections related to recyclable materials. And then there are numerous changes, however, I'm just capturing the highlights related to this issue. In 2017, you had China's implementation of National Sword, which was an effort to increase and ramp up bans on materials and an increased level of inspections on those materials to make sure they're whole. And then as recently as January 2018, you had the national source setting ultra-low contamination rates, around 0.5% of contamination rates, which are driving all of these changes in this magnitude of impact. We tried to capture some headlines so that everybody's aware and can be on the same page, that we understand that this is a worldwide impact, it's a national impact. You've got places like China saying no to a ton of material. You've got new places that are being found in the Southeast Asian markets that are, while they were opportunistic at the time, are now starting to adjust, and some of them are starting to say no to materials as well. So you understand that it's a major impact. That led up to Republic Services' letter in March of this year, which captured essentially 4 items. And I guess I should pause and ask, do you all have this presentation in front of your screen? So Republic sent their letter in March asking for 4 options, asking the cities choose one of 4 options that they laid out at that time. First option being a 90-cent increase in rates, and also remove paper from the recycling stream. There were another 2 options that were asking for a $1.25 increase, one of which would have been tied to markets on a monthly basis in sort of a float rate that would go up and down. The other being an annual look, request a $1.25, and would look at that annually based on the recycling markets. And there was a 4th option that City Council has since taken off the table, that was a $1 cost savings at the time, and the recycling program, which the City Council removed off. With that, with that request, SWAC asked staff to take a look, and that's what we've been doing over the last couple of months, is looking and working with the public to see what's behind the request, what's going on in the markets, what's behind the numbers. Our initial reach out to Republic was to ask what was the initial makeup behind the $1.25 request, which was the initial March request that we were looking at. In front of you, you see what we were provided, in that the breakdown was shown that there was a processing cost, a freight cost, there's a trash cost, and then there was a sale of the commodity, which would offset some of those costs, giving you a total commodity value. And then there was an application of a value that was related to the community recycling fund for Meridian, wind up at the $1.25 cost. Staff looked at that and sort of scratched their heads a little bit and worked back and forth with Republic, asking for more information, looking at it. Particularly the jump from the 77-cent loss in the value of commodity to the $1.25 being associated with the value of trying to attain what the future value of any recycling fund income might be. We didn't feel that was appropriate at the time, so we started to look more closely. We wanted to look at both Republic's conditions in the business market. We looked at our internal processes. We also looked at the recycling markets and how the programs had been established in Meridian. So we looked at Republic's corporate status. Quarter 2 2018 was showing over 15% profits on net income, over 15% increase on net income. Both transfer and landfill station incomes were up, and they were returning money to the shareholder. We also understood that as a corporate strategy, they're looking to build in some indices and changes to their models across the country, looking for more than 3% increases in their franchise contracts to allow them to operate in cost of business. Recyclables, as we know, their revenues were down about 4.5%. We also understand that recyclables nationally as a corporation make up about 4% of their total revenue. And those come from Republic Services material as well. Then we moved on and looked at Meridian's program just to understand exactly where have we been with recycling. In the year 2000, source-separated recycling began, and I know some of this may be old information for some of you, maybe new for others. But that's when the source separation began with the previous franchise contractor in the city of Meridian. And everything was moving along well through 2009 when the recycling markets were positive. 2009 is when the commingled recycling program began, and they were also starting to see some changes in the market. There were some ups and downs. Again, this is a commodity market, so there is volatility in it. In 2009, there was some understanding that there would be an earmark of some of the base cost, and I believe this alludes to Commissioner Pogue's question a little bit about what is the cost of recycling. There was an effort to earmark some cost to understand that it accounts for recycling. 2010 and 11, there was a transition of a year during the conversation, but the communication began to get a little clearer, and SSC came to the council recommending that because of the shift in two negative markets in the recycling industry. They needed to solve this problem. And so I highlight this because there's a couple things going on. One, SSC, who was the franchise provider prior to Republic, recommended that the city not take the downside risk to recycling, and the risk should be borne by the provider at that time. However, there's also another component of this that shows there was negotiation and conversation to realize that there is a cost to this and that the city did recognize that, and there was a conversation about shifting some earmarked costs that were related to recycling and household hazardous waste to the base rate, and a shift in the community recycling fund to allow revenues to come at an 80-20 split, 80% to the city, 20% to Republic, to account for some of those costs in recycling that Republic could use that 20% to offset some of that. With that, SSC at the time. With that shift, the council recognized and the provider recognized that there's a cost to it. However, that cost remains on the business side, and there was a conversation about it. This was followed up in 2015 with the SWAC subcommittee report, which there were multiple parties to, including Republic, including Western representatives and SWAC representatives. There was an agreement in that document that the commitment to keep recycling material keep recycling occurring by Republic, and keep up its contractual obligations, which included paying for net costs. That was one of the findings of that report. Again, this is capturing that we've reviewed lots of data. We've gone back and forth. As recently as yesterday, we received an updated letter of support with our recommendations, which we'll get to at the end. But we went back and forth with the Republic over a host of data, a couple different versions of data, and analysis of which data sets to use, whether you use an annual data set or a run rate data on a few months worth of revenue. Nonetheless, we do have a letter of support with the methodology that we've landed on for an annual period. There are some differences, and Rodney alluded to it in the previous conversation about whether or not a franchise fee element and whether or not a processing cost element is appropriate in the request for the recycling component. We'll get to that again. We'll move on. Through all of that analysis, we do recognize and we do understand as a body and as a staff that there is a cost of processing recycling materials, and it has increased. We get that. We know that. We understand. We also have contractual issues that we want to highlight, and that we believe this request is outside of our contractual obligation. At the same time, the history does include negotiating some of these costs and having these conversations. That's what contracts are for, is to have these conversations. The parties feel that it's necessary. We do agree as staff in principle that we're willing to share in some level of the risk. And again, it's the methodology differences. We believe in annual look, and we believe in annual process that follows the CPI process. So we would look at data from July to June of the next following year. And then we'll have the conversation about the franchise and the processing fees. So the options is, as we see them moving forward, again, this is as of yesterday. We got Republic's updated letter. You've got 83 cents on the residential side and 76 cents on the commercial side. See the percentage increase is calculated from the current fiscal year 18 total collection rate. That's $18.14 on the residential side. And I utilize the commercial, I believe is a 3-gallon cart size with a 1-week pickup. $48.74. The pros and cons of that for the body to consider are that this proposal does add a third-party vendor processing cost, and it does add a franchise recapture. Both options, and I'll get to the second one in a moment, establish the recycling processing component of the fee table. Both of them require an amendment because they are outside of the contract, so we'd have to amend the contract as a separate document. And that this would be an annual look again, and you'd have an annual update similar to what we're going through right now. When you look at household hazardous waste, you would have the same concept with the recycling material. The options that we looked at as staff, you've got on the residential side 63 cents and 56 cents on the commercial side. The difference between what we see as an option as staff and what Republic is proposing is 20 cents, and that is made up of the processing cost of 15 cents that Rodney alluded to, and roughly a 5-cent franchise component that I alluded to in the CPI conversation. In our mind, this uses the annual data only. It just captures from July to June what are the net revenue losses in each of the components, residential and commercial, and it breaks it out monthly. And it's on the residential side, it's per account basis, and on the commercial side, it's a per average yard basis. It seems like a sound scientific body of information that we have access to. We have access to it regularly. It's updated, and it tracks for us. It's in line with the CPI process that's currently followed. Again, it's a July to June process. And it recognizes that there is volatility in the market and that there's some acceptance on the staff's and the city's view to accept some of that risk and some of that cost. There is a question as to whether or not there's a risk to that option. Originally, when we started this conversation, there was a request or a indication from our public that they would take the material to the landfill. I think we've addressed that, given that there's been a letter of support for the 63-cent component, but it would be helpful to have Republic's acknowledgement whether or not that's resolved. If it's not, then that is a potential risk that's out there we see. With that, our recommendation, in order to keep our contractual obligations in line, work with our partners, and follow the precedent about costs having been discussed before on the recycling side, we recommend the 63 cents and the 56 cents. We don't believe that the franchise fee component and the processing fee component are relevant in this increase request for two reasons. One, the franchise fee is a component in our mind that would essentially be us asking the ratepayers to pay an increase to pay back the city of Meridian for an increase in a rate. Whereas in my mind as staff, it just doesn't seem to make sense to ask the ratepayers for an increase of a franchise rate when that rate is already being calculated, and we just don't understand it. We don't see that that's a viable ask for us. On the processing fee, we struggle with this one because when we initially encountered this conversation, we looked at the breakdown, which you saw on slide 2, that had $1.06 for processing, another cost for transport, another cost for shipping, and et cetera. When we asked Republic what that $1.25 original request was made up of, it was indicated that it was for the costs of processing and shipping and bailing and things of that nature. We then asked what's this new charge that came out later of 15 cents for processing costs, and it's indicated that it was for the same process that's occurring with their vendor. In our mind, it doesn't make sense that we would double up that processing cost. What we're looking at is the net revenue is the cost of processing this material, and in our mind, that 63 cents is related to that cost of processing that material. That's why we recommend the 63 cents and the 56 cents residential and commercial. Again, these do require an amendment to the contract, regardless of what direction we go, if a rate element is adopted or accepted or recommended for approval. So we'd have to go through that process. We do understand the time calendars are a little tight because we would understand the CPI process to get that effective October 1. There is the ability, if the commission chooses, to keep the processing of recyclable materials and the fee associated with that as a separate conversation. There's nothing right now that says that has to be implemented on October 1. So we have a little bit of a way to figure out how we want to go forward if commission recommends and council approves that we want to keep the conversation separate versus putting this all together in one CPI process to go forward. But there are options if that's what the recommendation becomes. Maybe with that, there is another component that we do recommend, and that is over the next year work to have a comprehensive survey, statistically sound, where we discuss with the community the recycling programs, what the goals and desires of the community are around recycling. That's been recommended several times, the last being in 2015 with the SWAC subcommittee report, and we just haven't got there through various reasons. We've had staff turnover, we've had a lot of things going on. It hasn't gotten done, but we do recommend that carry forward over this next year. And maybe at that I'll stop and we'll leave it for questions and we can go.
Members of the commission, I think now would be a good time for you to, if you've got questions on the information presented by David, to focus on that, to go ahead and come to a understanding of the information that David has presented.
Mr. Chair, I have one question for Dave. Thank you so much. This presentation is demonstrative of a lot of hard work that has gone into it. If you could go back one slide, I just have a question. So options, the delta from current FY18 rate, what rate is that? Because
So,
there wasn't a processing rate that was approved. So I'm not
Mr.
clear
Chair,
on that.
Commissioner Pogue, the percentage change in that is looking at the 83 cents compared to the current FY18 trash and collection rate, the $18.14. We didn't get into looking at mixing this current conversation about CPI and plastics and increase. We kept these completely separate from an analysis standpoint. We looked at what is the current cost today of a consumer in Meridian doing business with their trash bill. It's $18.14 for a 95-gallon residential car. And we wanted to just paint that clear picture of today they're paying $18.14. What would a change, if this were accepted, look like? That's where that 4.6% comes from and the rest of the column.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Members of the commission, additional questions of David?
Mr. Chair.
Councilman.
I don't know, it didn't sound like I was on. So just to clarify on this slide, in the top, the 4.2% for commercial is for 3 yards, and the bottom commercial percentage increase is for 1 yard, so it'd be 3.6. Is that right?
The way we ran the percentage change is that they are reflective of the 3-yard bin 1 time a week, $48.70. Check my math.
Okay. The 1.2, I guess, is the one that stands out, like, but that doesn't make sense. I think that one might have broken down for 1 yard. Still, it wouldn't make, the 20 cents wouldn't make a 3% difference.
We got 1.14% on the 56
Not really that
cents.
important. I'm just trying to figure it out. Get all the other numbers.
You are correct. The upper number in the commercial, the 4.2, should be 1.6.
Should be what?
Mr. Chair,
0.6.
could you have them speak up?
1.6.
I apologize.
Okay. It was like those, yeah, 4.2. Sorry, not trying to.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you for pointing that out.
David, could you
Yeah, they were like, what?
restate that so the commission can hear the conclusion of that?
Yes. The math behind the Republic Service proposal of 821 at the commercial level of 76 cents is a 1.6% change, not a 4.2. I apologize for that.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yes, Council. Go
I
ahead,
was just
Commissioner.
going to clarify, in this third-party vendor processing costs, is that Western Recycling's MRF that we're talking about?
I can't hear what she.
Is that Western? The third party, that's Western, right?
Oh. Yeah, yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
We couldn't hear it.
Are these on?
This
Dave,
one's on.
I'm just wanting clarification that the third-party vendor processing costs refer to Western Recycling's MRF and their costs.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Pogue. So when we looked at the processing costs versus what the overall request was, it asked the question, what does that consist of? In August, the 15 cents was referred to the direct cost for processing commingled recycled materials that would otherwise be landfilled. It includes material sorting process that readies the recyclable materials for the sale of the marketplace. When we asked the question in May, when we were first asked for $1.25, and we asked what is the breakdown of that and what does that include, we were told that the processing cost, the processing component on slide 2 there, includes separating, baling, and loading trucks. We were told that the transport includes getting bales or containers to the market, and the contamination cost includes trash expenses related to the contamination component. Staff's mind, those are the same thing. We don't understand what the difference is, other than we do understand that there's a cost increase that's being borne by Republic from their third-party vendor. It's for the same action. It's for the same components, as we understand it from what we were told. So in our mind, we don't understand what the 15 cents is, other than another ask, which it's the price of doing business in our mind. We are looking at what is the cost to the citizens considering the change in the recycling markets. That includes the processing, the transport, the shipping, the baling, and the trash components. That's the net revenue loss that we feel is the appropriate option. Does that answer your question?
And Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Pogue, I think I can add some clarity there. So this slide that we're looking at is accurate at the time. And one thing that we've never had in the past is an obligation from Western Recycling or the third-party processor to actually tell us to forecast what their expenses are going to be, what their increases are going to be. So in the past, they would come to us and say, next month it's going to go up this. And we didn't really have any relationship where we would be able to say anything other than, okay, we need this show to keep going, so we're going to pay that. So this is the first time, and I don't know if anyone here is from Western, but we put them on notice saying we have to respond to every municipal calendar year, so fiscal year, and it goes live October 1st. If you're planning on increasing your fees at all in the next fiscal year, we need to know that now. And so this is accurate as of right now today, but every year it's like Stericycle, Hazardous Waste, or any other vendor. We have asked them to come to us with their proposed increases and then justify them. And so we sat down, I know Rodney did, with Western and went through their books and really went through a comprehensive overview to vet that number, and it is a number that they have proven to stay in the market and stay viable, that it's going to be 15 cents per household per month, effective October 1st. They wanted those increases way back in, March maybe? They wanted them in March, and we said, we're not going to do that anymore. We have to wait and propose those with everything else in the next calendar year. So that 15-cent increase is something that we will be paying as of October 1st, and every year they will come back to us and to justify their costs and ask for an increase. As far as the franchise fee, we're fine. Carrie nailed it. So we already pay a franchise fee on all the billings. These are losses to us that we've already incurred. And to take 6% of our losses, we don't even get back to ground zero. So if you want to add the 63 cents for the staff recommendation and leave any losses exempt from franchise, I think that's fantastic. And that saves a nickel on the rate. But we don't want to, finally get some sort of recovery from those losses and then have to turn around and pay a franchise fee on the losses. So hopefully that makes sense. So unlike other rates, these are just on losses. So yeah, if we can leave that 63 cents, any losses exempt from franchise, that would be fantastic. I mean, I'm probably speaking way out of turn because I haven't looked to my right, but that's what I would recommend if you guys want to do that. And we could just look at, maybe some years there are no losses, and then it's just franchise fee only. But on losses, it would be tough for us to pay a franchise fee on our losses.
Mr. Chair, if I can add to that.
Go ahead.
With our recommendation of the 63 cents, it does include that this would become an annual look, and that it would be a standalone component similar to HHW, unattached to the CPI, unattached to that. So it would be a standalone loss figure that we would look at each year. We looked at the data with the mindset that we typically do as staff and city billing processes, that we bill in arrears, understanding that Republic's been told they have a cost increase or potential cost increase coming. This is a commodity market. We do know they change. We don't have a crystal ball, and the predictions are that the markets are down and will likely stay down. Will they get worse? Nobody knows. Will they get better? Nobody knows. However, there's many that say probably not, but there are some that say it won't get much worse. This is about as worse as it's been. So we looked at it through the lens of the fact that this is a commodity market, and that this is, in our process through the city billing, and most of our contracts are done in arrears. So we look at what was lost in July 17 through June of 18, and that's the 63 cents that we came up. So we do envision that we would be back again next year with a similar process to say what was lost from July 18 through June 19, and go through that process again. I think might help address the franchise fee, but I just thought that would be worthwhile to clarify.
Thank you, David.
Mr. Chair, David or Rodney maybe, I'm struggling with the base, right? Because you're talking about that this would be a separate, recycling would be a separate carved out component in future years that you'd look at separately, and yet the percentage that you're calculating is on the overall trash cost. And I would assume the the increase is much higher than 3.5% on recycling. Trash hasn't moved a whole lot, but the recycling piece has moved significantly. If we're going to look at it as a standalone, what's the base? What does it cost to recycle in Meridian right now? Is it $5 out of that 18? Is it $10 out of that 18? I think the people should know that. I'd like to know that. It's not 3.5% increase. It's something more, I think.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, we have looked at those numbers and had those conversations. One of the things that we are working through is how to handle that and what's the best way to represent that. I know Commissioner Pogas and Rodney spoke about there's the service component, which the CPI is calculated on, which is behind the rate. Of that service component, there is some amount that is related to recycling and some related to the trash collection process. We've been working through that math based on Asking Republic and based on our own information. We come to a number that is in line with the 2015 SWAC subcommittee report, which estimated somewhere between, I might get my low number wrong, $2.90-ish up to $3.37. If we were to look at the actual costs that were agreed to when the recycling program began in 2000 with a cost of $2.10, if you just run inflation on that, up to 2010 when there was a minor change of shifting 20 cents, which we talked about on this slide, you add that in and then run inflation again, you come up to roughly $3.29, which falls inside that window of what the SWAC report in 2015 alluded to. We haven't, Republic hasn't validated that for us, but if you just run the numbers based on inflation and the CPI that we've used, that's a number that we get to. So yes, to your question, that would be a different percentage than what is compared to against the overall rate. However, when we're looking at the CPI process, we tried to keep in line with that theory and that process. CPI process looks at what's the percentage change from last year's bill to this year's bill. And so that's what we were presenting for the percentage change to stay consistent with that. But you are correct that would be a different number.
Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman.
I really appreciate that question, and it makes me, I'm all about numbers, and it makes me think. So it's off the entire bill, not a recycling portion. Is that what you're saying? Because basically 4.2% is, 63 cents is $50. So that would be based on $15 today, a 4.2% increase would be 63 cents.
Right, but on.
No.
Mr. Chair,
go ahead.
I guess what I was getting at, on $3.29, which I recognize is an estimate, this is a 19% increase.
Still base.
Maybe outside of the scope of this discussion, but I think it's important for the people of the community to understand that and somehow get that use less message driven home, right? The very best thing that they can do is use less, right? And understand, that recycling has a cost to it. And I think it's hard for people to understand that, really hard for people to understand that. And we're burying that 19% increase in the cost of recycling, or whatever it is, 18, 20, 16. It's not 4.
18. So, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
So the $18.14 is the current year rate, and that's what we're basing that
It's
off
on the
of.
entire bill. Okay.
Commissioner, yes, if you consider just the recycling cost, that would be different as well. And one of the things that we have in our mind is we know we have a lot of issues going on. We've got the CPI request, we've got the plastics request, we've got the hefty energy bag going on, we've got a lot of things related to trash and recycling that are occurring. One of our recommendations is that move forward through this conversation with these issues at hand so that we can move them forward, particularly the CPI component. And then throughout next year, let's have the conversation about how this should be reflected on the rate table moving forward so that everybody does have that clear picture.
Now, again, Commission, like I said, focus on questions on David's presentation to make sure we understand that before we move on to a broader conversation. Rodney, I'm going to guess that you thought you had something you needed to add at that point, but maybe it would wait until we get to the broader conversation, or?
Thank you, Chairman. Wasn't sure if you were going to come back around to us or not. I mean, some of the things that David's talking about, and Commissioner Larson, and your questions about how much of this is trash and how much of this is recycling. The contract was bid and signed as a service component, both trash and recycling. If you pull the recycling component out, the cost of trash goes up. That waste will go to the landfill instead of to a recycling center. The waste is still there. So it really changes the whole dynamic of it. So there's, the allocation, certainly there was some number in the beginning, but, to come to what the actual number is would take some analysis. And I'm not sure if that's a real benefit, because the way that services are priced to the citizens of Meridian is it's all inclusive. If a citizen refuses a recycling cart, they still pay the same rate. If they didn't, it would become more like a subscription service, which causes the whole program to go up. So to make the program affordable for the entire city, it's bundled as a price, and all the citizens share in it equally. So the only difference being that there is some concession given for the size of the cart. Other than that, customers share in the whole cost. So.
Mr. Chair, just historically, the franchise agreement entered into with Steve SSC was for solid waste, trash only. It wasn't until 2000 that City Council approved a residential source-separated recycling program, and the additional charge to trash rates was $2.10. So I wasn't sure what Mr. Remling was saying with regard to how the contract was originally bid out. I just pulled that 2000 reso today, though, and read it and told you what it said. So not sure if that helps anything or not.
Even know how to do it.
Thank you for that history.
Mr. Chairman, these guys they can't hear. I mean, we can't hear over here and they can't hear over there, so we're doing some interpreting. I don't know if there's a way to turn them up or something, because these guys can't really hear.
Yes.
Yes, I was a little reluctant to go ahead and throw in another 2 cents, but I can see that we're recording for the record. But as far as the volume from where we're speaking.
Oh, there we go.
All of it.
And so I was going to go ahead and suggest using your outside voice, but I think.
Yes.
I don't know.
I don't know if we broke something, but.
It sounds better. Does it sound better? Do you get?
There.
There.
I'll turn it down. Off.
Okay.
Try that.
Test.
That's way better.
Better?
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, members of the commission, again, this is a very complex subject, and I'm trying my best to go ahead and have us be able to work through this in a way that we don't trip over various parts. So if you have additional questions or comments on David's presentation, please bring them forth at this point.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner, Councilwoman.
I have a question regarding the risk. So if you recommend to increase the rate by the 63 cents, then the stuff still might be going to the landfill?
Mr. Chair, Councilwoman Milam, we looked at that question in the initial lens. We were asked to consider $1.25 and then $1.24 as recently as July, or that the material would be moved to the landfill. Contractually, as staff, we don't believe that is allowable under the contract. However, the question is still remaining to us. If we recommend 63 cents, and that's what's recommended by SWAC, is there a risk that ask from Republic is still out there? Given that we've been provided a letter of support for the 63 cents, this is an assumption. Staff wouldn't believe that would still be the case. However, it would be helpful to have that clarity from Republic.
I'm Don Tibbetts. I'm the general manager for Republic Services. Recently replaced Dave Fisher.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Yeah, so I'm sorry. I was using my outside voice. No, the 63 cents plus the franchise fee and the processing fee is what we would need in order to guarantee that it would not be landfilled. So it's not just a portion of it. So I basically conceded on the lower amount that the city or that staff recommended from my initial letter. And the reason I did that was based on the view of a partnership that I felt we had. Basing it on CPI, that doesn't make a lot of sense because the commodity market's completely independent of CPI. So that's confusing. But again, new in the role, I don't want to push back too much. So I went ahead and agreed to it or conceded to it, if you will. You know, it is confusing, to your point, with the cost of recycling embedded in trash. You know, that's kind of an old practice, and it's not something that's used in contracts very often any longer because it's confusing. Reality is recycling does cost, and it costs a lot, especially in today's market. If you can't sell something and you have to pay somebody to take it off your hands, it's not a commodity. You're disposing of it. I'm just paying for it to go one place instead of another.
So Mr. Chairman, Don, what about, one of the question Councilwoman Mylum asked me is, what if we have the 63 cents and we're not charged a franchise fee on the losses? So
Yeah.
we have a service component that is where on our service, and that's our revenue, and there's a 6% kickback, but not on the losses that David referred to as like starting to look at losses year over year, and then looking at those. What if there's not a franchise fee on the losses component?
Yeah, and that's completely acceptable. Yeah, if we don't have to pay the city a 6% franchise fee on a loss, then yeah, that's fine. We can agree to that.
And what about rolling? So we know we're going to incur costs, and I know this is like probably I'm just switching sides of the fence here on this discussion. We know that we are going to incur costs from Western starting October 1st. We've agreed to it. They've justified their increases. We've been pushing them off since March. But now, to David's point, let's say we roll those. Can we roll those forward from October to next year's negotiations and bring it forward as the next 63 cents component and say, here's what we wind up losing last year, and that comes to 27 cents per household or whatever. Can we do that? And so we keep the program intact. We don't pay the franchise fee on our losses, which stand alone outside of the regular revenue.
Right. So a little bit of a awkward conversation because it seems like we're doing some public negotiation, which I would typically shy from.
I know.
And, you know, to bear the loss that we have been bearing and continue to bear that loss for another year, I don't see how it's feasible. And just to make it very clear, the reason that Western did come back with a further rate increase is because I got involved in the market and sat down with them and explained to them that they can't come back and ask us for a rate increase multiple times during the year. It doesn't work. That's not the way our model works. It's not the way the cities work. So I told them I requested that they need to calculate everything that they plan on doing, all of what their increased expenses are going to be over the next year, and provide that rate to us. That's where that increase jumped from an additional 15 cents. It's to cover what their additional asks were going to be throughout 2019. Did I answer your question? Roundabout.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
David.
Clarification, the 63 cents, I just want to make sure, is not predicated on CPI. It's predicated on following the CPI calendar. I just want to make that clarity.
Thank you for the clarity.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Andrew.
With regard to the negotiated agreement with Western that you've achieved, that's if it's good for a year, if the 73,000 figure is good for a year, that's good news. Except, what do you have built in to audit that at the end of the year to make sure that they actually incurred those costs?
Sure, that's a great question. So Western, our vendor, is a for-profit private company, so there aren't really any safeguards in place that we're able to do that. The only reason, or the only way that we can do that, or the only mechanism that we have, is to approach them in a partnership and have them open their books to us, which they've done so far. Rodney's reviewed it, I've reviewed it, and to Rochelle's point, we do agree that the profit that they're making is appropriate, It's not extreme by any means. So we can only go into it next year with the same approach.
Thank you, Don.
And Commissioner Pogue, to add that they did open their books to us. Rodney spent several days with them looking over all their numbers and asked them to re-rack them and reformat them so that we understood them. And it was, they did really comply with that request. So,
Mr. Chair, one more
David.
point of clarification. In regards to the 15 cents, whether it's Republic's request for this year or it's Western's cost for next year, the recommendation is that this will be an annual process, and so we would look at next year's annual losses. This year's annual losses is for next year. That's how we have typically done our billing, is in arrears. So whether it's the Commission's preference to account for that today or at the look next year, those costs will be accounted for.
Is there a mechanism, and this is my ignorance to the contract, so I do apologize. Is there a mechanism within the contract to realize the losses that we've been exposed to and then obviously recoup them?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Tibbetts' question is related to this whole issue. It would be an amendment process. So this, regardless of what is chosen of any fee amount, if a fee amount is chosen, it has to go through an amendment because it's outside of the scope of the contract, so it has to be an amendment to the contract, again, which in partnership we're willing to consider and move that forward. So that would, our recommendation is that would become an annual process.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilwoman.
Sorry, Mr. Tibbetts. I guess maybe I've missed something. I'm just still a little bit confused what the 63 cents does then. So it doesn't guarantee us recycling. It pays for you to pick up the recycling and take it to the dump. Or, I mean, this body is being asked to make a recommendation, and based on, I mean, what if we do nothing? I mean, if 63 cents isn't going to get us recycling, I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. I'm just trying to understand it. So don't get me wrong. I don't feel like it's been really clearly laid out what that 63 cents gets us.
Sure, and I'm happy to answer that. The 63 cents with the 15 cents processing fee, which will be charged, and the waiver of the franchise fee of 6% or added back in, embedded like the other collection, that would assure that we would be able to not landfill the material, that we are still not breaking even, we're still operating at a loss, but we would move far enough that, again, in the spirit of partnership, I would guarantee that we would not landfill that material at that point.
So you're talking about the 83 cents?
Or 78 cents.
Or 78,
Yeah.
not the franchise. With waiving the franchise fee, adding 50. So 78 cents is what we really need to guarantee that we have recycling.
Correct.
Because I think this body needs to understand that, and I don't think anybody wants to send our recycling to the landfill for 15 cents. Personally, I wouldn't, but
Well, it's, Mr. Chair,
an opinion.
and it would be, Mr. Chair, and it would be my understanding that that would negate the contract that we have with Republic Services anyway. The recycling, if it's my understanding that the contract, the way it's written, if our recycling ends up in the landfill, that is a violation of a direct violation of our contract anyway. That's the way I was understanding it.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
at what point do we recommend to the city that they renegotiate the contract?
Well, and let me step back for a second here, because I think there are some issues that we need to do. First off, David's been very clear about this. All of these that we're discussing, based on his presentation, all require a renegotiation of the contract in sync with whatever number comes up. And
Mr. Chair, this issue requires an amendment to the contract.
right, I should say, yeah, it's an amendment. It's not a renegotiation. We aren't invalidating or, well, regardless. And so therefore, that was kind of why I was stumbling into separating the issues. Since what we discussed before, there is no outstanding issues, but we can come into that in the end. And I think one of the other things that's should be on the table at this particular point, if it's clear, Councilwoman, has there been a discussion about the fact that we all understand the need for a survey and we should pursue that? We've discussed doing a survey, but is there an understanding that there would be a public hearing associated with this? Or is that kind of something that will come down the path depending on the size of the increase and the change in activities that may, or is there an understanding that we're definitely going to have a public hearing on this?
You know, I think anytime there's a rate increase, we have a public hearing over a certain amount. So I'm assuming, I'm making an assumption that we would be having a public hearing, but it hasn't been something that's been specifically discussed.
And I think I would go ahead and agree with you on that what we discussed in the first and second portions of this, if that were to stand alone, it would not be over the 5% number and therefore would not need a public hearing. If the third item, which we're discussing now with recycling, is included in a single rate increase for both of them, then it will be over the 5%, triggering that need for a public hearing, which likely would not just be scoped to the increase, but would be taking comments of people on the services that underlie that increase. Just so you know, and I'm going to back out of this again and then try to redirect the conversation. If you have questions of David on his presentation, please go ahead and work on those comments or questions, and then we'll move into a larger discussion once we get through that. Commissioners.
Mr. Chair, maybe this is a question then for later, but I was just wondering, Dave, did you entertain any conversations with Republic Services about the possibility of entering into a separate agreement that would include Western Recycling so that Republic Services wouldn't be put in this position of negotiating something with Western Recycling that they have to turn around and tell us to accept? It's unusual, you know, for the city not to be a signer on that contract. So I'm just wondering if that came up at all, if that's possible.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, we haven't had that conversation. It's certainly an option that's out there if that's the direction that staff is given. It's certainly something that we would entertain with the conversation. We just haven't gotten there.
Thank you. You know, for me, this is the year calling for greater transparency in the area of recycling, and anything that can get us to greater transparency on behalf of households and city, I think would be worthwhile. So I just had that thought about if Republic Services is bringing now third-party vendor processing costs, and that's involving negotiations, why couldn't the city do that on its own, you know, and have all parties signing off on an agreement? I don't know that would require a change in our overall franchise agreement, or if it could be done separately with regard to just the area of recycling. I don't know.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Pogue, I'm not an attorney, so I couldn't speak to the contractual issues. We would have to talk with our staff attorneys and get the recommendation from them. So
you can ask.
Certainly
what I'm saying is, what I asked was, had anybody discussed that with Republic Services, and I gather no.
Or as I can tell, not.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Pogue, I haven't heard that yet, but we would love that. We think that would bring so much relief to this whole conversation.
Yeah.
Do you want to add to that, Don?
Mr. Chair. Commissioner, yeah, that is something we'd be very open to. So in my previous life, I was the general manager in Seattle, and one of the facilities that I oversaw was the largest MRF in the Pacific Northwest, not just within Republic Services, but within the country. And that's a model that we started going to quite some time ago. In fact, our largest customer is the city of Seattle, and the collections are done completely separate from the processing. And it really does provide the transparency that citizens want to see in these contracts. Mm-hmm. You know, the service provider is paid to pick up the material at the curb, deliver it to the facility. What's done after that is completely out of the hands of the service provider. It can be worked up several different ways where the commodity passes 100% back to, if there is a commodity value, passes back to the municipality, which then in turn typically reduces the overall collection rates. But all of that can be worked out. But yes, Republic would be very open to that.
We definitely want
Mr. Commissioner,
Yes.
I need some clarification. So, Dave, you were saying that the 63 cents establishes recycling processing component of fee, your slide, and then, sir, you had said an additional 15 cents of processing, so we came up with the number of 78 cents? Isn't that processing fee in there twice then?
Well, may I suggest a little difference in wording that might help us quite a bit? The 63 cents, if I understand it correctly, is a look back at the market change and the market costs that have occurred. And it includes the processing through that time period as well as freight and all of the other activities that are in that one slide that comes up to $1.24. And if I'm hearing correctly, the 15 cents additional is a heads up that's been given to us from Western telling us that they've already started to incur costs of that magnitude. And of course, you've already talked to them and told them that that they need to be in cycle. And so that wouldn't be something that they can charge you until October 1st. But yes, in the 63 cents, there is processing costs that are similar to the 15 cents that's being done. It's kind of the difference is what's in the 63 cents is look back to what's already been hitting us, and the 15 cents is something we recognize going up and above for future, for Western's planned activities.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is correct. So the 63 cents, and Rodney, please correct me if I'm wrong, was due to the increase in processing, baling, transport, getting it to the ports previously. The additional 15 cents is we met with Western in June, I believe, and in March, April-March timeframe, they had notified us that they were going to give us another price increase. So we had already relayed the 63 cents, I believe, if that was the exact number. But the 15 cents is the additional fees that they were going to that they had actually tried to get us to start paying already. And to add to your, or clarify your statement a little bit, to put it in perspective, historically commodities had a value, and so there was obviously revenue associated with that. Current commingled value of materials, so when we talk about commingled, if you look at your recycle bin and you wheeled that out and sold it to somebody, prices right now are about $32 a ton. That's what you're going to get. It costs us, including transportation, processing, and getting it to the ports, it's about $137 a ton. So you can see there's over $100 worth of disparity there.
Thank you.
Which, Mr. Chairman, this is totally an aside, but back to Commissioner Larson's point, I think that that's the bigger picture, is that it is expensive, and if we can reduce the overall volume, that really actually helps. Not just putting more in the trash, but actually reducing what we're shipping, like Don's saying. So I know that that's on our long-term, agenda of addressing that, but I think that's important to recognize.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner.
David, on that table that you showed, that you had with the $1.25, so the 63 cents or the 78 cents, we can't really break that down in a similar type of way, like how much of that is reduced in sale of commodity. There's not a comparable sort of table that shows how that 78 cents breaks down because it's calculated differently. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, we did not ask for the breakdown that we had already had on this request. What we asked for was the actual data that showed the net revenue loss per month on the residential commodity. So we knew that it consisted of these components. We asked for the data behind this to show what the actual number was. So I think in Republic, certainly if you feel differently, chime in. But essentially the 63 cents was a true up of what this reflected initially.
But we don't know out of which lines that true up occurred.
We do not know. If Republic has that information, we'd be happy to take a look at it.
Mr. Chair, I greatly
Follow up.
apologize. I have to step away. So I hope you're not going to lose quorum, but I'll just say that I think it's very important that recyclables get recycled, so we need to set the rate accordingly. And I'm very much in favor of transparency and helping people understand what the costs of recycling are. So I would hope that as we move into FY19, we're moving towards that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, further questions about the material that David presented?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
David, I know, I keep bringing up what the other clients of Republic are doing, but you have similar data throughout Ada and Canyon counties as far as rates of disposal, cost of disposal, cost of collection, et cetera. Do you know what the other communities have agreed to for an increase? I mean, I know some are very careful and go through it with a fine-tooth comb, like the city of Boise, and some maybe not quite as careful, and they'll just accept Republic's word as being a true partner in this endeavor. But do you have any idea? Just so we're talking 78 cents apparently now. I wondered what other communities in this area have agreed to.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, we did look at that information, and everybody is a little unique. We do know that. We didn't look at the specifics of their contracts or the specifics of their data, which made up a number, but we do know that of the roughly 7 cities in Ada County, both Star and Ada County have not yet made a decision as recently as late July when we last talked to them. The other cities have made decisions. City of Boise, as Republic alluded to, negotiated with them based on how their contract works and came up with a figure. We don't know what that number was, and we don't know how it correlates to the original $1.25 request. The rest of the cities accepted a $1.25 increase, with the exception of Middleton, which accepted the 90-cent option, removed paper, and we haven't had an update on whether that's worked for them or not. So yes, out of the cities in Ada County, with the exception of 2, the others have made decisions.
Mr. Chairman, so David, based on what you know, the information that you have, if the 78 cents were agreed upon by the SWAC, it would be lower than any community has agreed to, the 7 or 6 or whatever it is, other than the city of Boise, and maybe we could ask Republic what it is that the city of Boise agreed to.
Chair and Commissioner, that's correct.
You are not obligated to answer a question, but if you feel that you want to go ahead and provide that information about Boise, you're welcome to step up and answer the question of the Commissioner.
So the information we provided to the City of Meridian, we also provide to the City of Boise, and the agreement with the City of Boise is that they cover the loss month to month. There is a small component that we're carrying into next year, but that was for another concession. So by and large, City of Boise is keeping Republic Services whole for the cost of their program of recycling.
Mr. Chairman and Rodney, then the amount that you would get for would change from month to month per household based on what you get for the commodities. They're covering it out of a surplus, must be from the Billing Services Enterprise Fund then?
They have an enterprise fund. We send them a bill at the end of every month, and they pay that bill. So it's a different setup than what the City of Meridian has available to it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Remling, unless it changed, I think, and would you agree that Boise's contract is that they bear 50% of the net cost of recycling, whereas here it's been Republic Services bearing 100% of the net cost. There's a difference in the contract, as I understand it.
there is a different contract, but Republic Services does not subsidize Boise's program. So the cost of the program is borne by the city. So they bear the cost of that.
Members of the commission, I'm going to go ahead and assume at this particular point that we have worked with David on his presentation and we're good with that. And so we could transition at this particular point into essentially I think where we're at this point would be the items that are discussed in the letter that Rodney provided us at the beginning. It was the 3 items. CPI adjustment methodology, the household hazardous waste and recycling service charges. And so at this particular point, members of the commission, do you have questions or comments of any of the people that have been providing information today on this subject?
I don't have any further questions. I think we've kind of skirted it around pretty good. There's a lot of discussion about being more transparent on the recycling, but it seems like in our contract, where that transportation and delivery is so tied together, the more recycling you have, the less trash and vice versa. I'd like the idea of kind of separating that out, but that's outside of the scope of today. So my question, I guess, is our purpose here is to recommend that the documents is provided with the old cleanup, move forward to City Council? Is that what our
Thank you.
is?
That's my obligation at this particular point. Of course, we are not a deciding body. We cannot approve these changes. The 2 things that our 2 charges, one is more important, which is that we believe that this is pulled together enough for it to actually be presented to the City Council for their consideration through their processes. The second one is if we further believe that we need to add a do pass or a do not pass recommendation. But we can pass it on if we think it's ready for their work without recommendation. So the next phase we would be going towards is, and I guess that's really where we're at this particular point. Do we feel like this information is now ready, that we recommend that the City Council consider it? Obviously intertwined with that is if we have a recommendation as to whether it be considered favorably or unfavorably or whatever else. But that's where we're at right now is it ready to be passed on?
So then my question then is to staff who vetted these numbers much better than I. After all today's discussion, is the documentation provided today explain enough for that conversation with City Council? Are we there to where this City Council could understand this presentation as, we have at least one update already. I saw it happen on the slide deck. Are we comfortable that it explains what our concerns are and going forward?
Mr. Chair, I think the way staff was looking at this and was the rate schedule and CPI adjustment, excluding this different topic of the recycling processing fee, could be evaluated today and a motion be made upon it. And then if SWAC felt that a motion was appropriate to make with regard to the recycling processing fee and related options, they could do that. Dave, is that fair?
Mr. Chair,
Is it a separate?
Commissioner, we couldn't hear what you were now proposing.
That the rate schedule as it exists and the related CPI adjustment that's being requested be looked at, and except for the tweak with the HHW and maybe one or two other tweaks that came up today that need to be made, that SWAC could evaluate it. So excluding this topic of the recycling processing fee, that maybe SWAC can feel that it's ready to have a motion and a recommendation to move it forward to City Council. But that a separate motion may or may not be made with regard to the recycling processing fee proposals and other possible options, that be dealt separately in a separate motion, whatever SWAC we would choose to do.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, from staff perspective, that's correct. We, if chosen, they could be handled separately. You could, as a commission, decide to make a recommendation on the CPI and the household hazardous waste, the annual ask that is typically done under one component, and then handle the plastics processing component separately. Contractually, there's no obligation that says the plastics component has to be resolved by October 1.
So, Mr. Chair, along those lines, I have a question for Public Services. If on this, the current rate schedule, for example, out of the $18.14 for the 95-gallon service, what would it take for Republic Services to be able to agree on what the cost of residential recycling collection service? What would it take to agree? Staff is, we went through this process as a commission in 2015, and Dave Fisher was at the table and giving us data. We started with the 210, we worked forward to that point in time, and as Dave recited, there was a range. Now staff is recommending the 324 or 329. You know, I'm interested in greater transparency, this rate review process cycle. Rodney, you indicated during your presentation that you don't have a number for that cost. Could whether, you know, I'm just wondering if we could add that, separate that out, that cost. So staff is saying 324 or 329. It gets a CPI adjustment to it for collection service. Could we break that out? And if we could do that, then I could move to recommend this spreadsheet with the CPI adjustment with the as you've presented. But I'd like to see that additional clarification.
Commissioner Pogue, certainly I understand your request. I would any number we provided, I would want to include a footnote on that because the assumption is if we provide a separate number, well, we can always discontinue one, and if you're going to discontinue one, you impact the price of the other. So we could give you a number, but we'd always include a footnote that these are still intrinsically linked costs. And to remove one impacts the other. We could do that. One way to think about it, though, is the cost of driving a recycling truck down the road is equal to the cost of driving a trash truck down the road. So those two costs are going to be pretty much the same, assuming we've got trucks of the same age, trucks of the same fuel type. They're going to be roughly the same cost. We pay the drivers the same. So our variable costs are going to be very much the same. They differ in disposal and processing. Those costs differ. So disposal is, you know, around $40 a ton and versus $137, as Dawn explained earlier. So I mean, those are the big differences in the costs. The disposal is already broken out separate.
Thank you, Mr. Ramling. I'd say that the services are different in that trash is weekly, recycling is twice a month. There's that difference. Trash goes to the transfer station, recyclables picked up go to the MRF. So there are differences.
Sure.
And I think so. But to get a handle on this collection, we have a recycling program, there are collection costs, they've been embedded. I'd like to see them separated out if that would be what I'd offer as my opinion today for the commissioners to consider with regard to just the rate schedule as it currently exists with the requested rate adjustment, and then treat separately the issue of the requested recycling processing fee, and see if we can come to an agreement on what we want to recommend about that.
I have a question, and that is that because of the third item requiring an amendment, we're certainly in a very awkward position to go ahead and recommend something that is subject to a process to get an amendment. And I'm wondering how far council would want us to go at this particular point, at risk of not knowing what may happen with the amendment. I think in my particular point, they would probably want us to be working on firm ground when we make recommendations to the council. So if we end up agreeing or disagreeing or whatever with the first portion of this with the CPI adjustment and the household hazardous waste, I mean, that's clear. We can definitively go there. But because of the fact that the third item is intertwined with an amendment process, would we be way at risk by doing anything now, considering the fact that there would have to be this amendment process coming up?
Mr. Chair, I don't think so, because our legal staff would take care of the amendment, and you're making a recommendation. So when you make a recommendation, all it does is it brings it to us to approve. So until we, of course, would want to see an amendment probably before approving it, but that process could happen in between your recommendation and it coming to council. So I don't feel that you need to have to do with anything of the with the amendment unless there's specifics that you want to discuss as a group. Then the legal puts in it, but that's what the legal staff is for. So I don't think that there's a risk personally in doing so with making a recommendation.
Thank you. Okay, so we're back with the commission. Do you have questions or comments in relationship to this proposal that's before us?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I would comment that we can go ahead and put a motion together for the first two items in Mr. Remling's letter. Separately, have a second motion with some recommendations to go to City Council regarding the third piece in his letter. Does that make sense? If Mark will get the motions going.
I do need to leave soon, so I don't want to break the quorum, so we do need to kind of...
I am kind of understanding there's no further comments on this thing, so a motion would definitely be in order at this point.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend pass the CPI adjustment methodology and household hazardous waste as stated with some amendments in Mr. Remling's letter to City Council for approval.
Second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that that we go ahead and forward the CPI adjustment methodology and the household hazardous waste adjustment to City Council for their consideration with the corrections that have been mentioned during this meeting being made to the tables. Further comments on that motion?
So, Mr. Chair, my further comment would just be to add to that the residential recycling collection costs or the collection costs for recycling be broken out.
Can you,
Yeah.
we can't hear you.
sorry. Just reiterate my previous comment that I'd like to see the cost of recycling collection service broken out from trash on, for transparency.
Would you like that part of the current motion?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, just for whatever it's worth on parliamentary procedure, of course, that could be added as an amendment to the motion, or if the maker of the motion is comfortable with that change and accept it, which you do.
I do.
And the second,
Second.
you agree with that addition to the, I mean, I guess I'm sitting here looking
who's seconding?
and realizing, I guess it was Victoria that really probably made the.
Said it at the same time, so.
Okay, well, okay, so I would then rule that that is included in there, as discussed, that pursuing breaking out recycling costs from trash collection costs, so that we start developing the transparency on the numbers. Further comments on the motion? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Okay, the motion passes. We now have on the table the third portion of this, the recycling service charge portion of this. Comments or motions?
So, Mr. Chair, I guess I would just comment that I'm still concerned about the delta from current FY18 rate percentage that was presented to us. I think it's, if anything, should be related to the recycling collection service, which is, you know, what we're now talking about breaking out. That's what we just recommended. So I would say I would be desirous to have that percentage be corrected, because as we discussed today, it's to Commissioner Larson, it represented a 19% increase. I don't know what the number is, but I think it should be accurate, and I think it's a lot higher, considering that in my estimation, it's a new fee, that it's more than 4.6%. And the 1.2 or 6, so.
Members of the commission, additional comments or motions?
Mr. Chair, but
Councilman.
I don't know as far as like making a recommendation if that's necessary. I know it's information that you want to have, and you could just assume that it's double that, right? So if the 63 cents is 3.5% of $18, break that and double it, it's like 7% of $9, roughly. If it costs half and half, which is kind of what we heard.
Well, I think based on what we've heard, 329 or 324, I don't know what I heard actually, something like that. So let's just say 324. That makes trash $8.76 of the current service. So the 324, what is 63% of 324?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, the number that I discussed that we as staff back calculated was 329, and based on 83 cents, that would be roughly 25.2%. 63 cents would be 63 cents would be roughly 19%, 19.1%.
19%,
78.
which is what Commissioner Larson calculated. And I think that's a more transparent and appropriate way to calculate a delta than from the overall trash bill, because it has to do with recycling.
I agree with that.
Okay.
However, I don't know that that needs to make a difference in your making a decision today. I feel like we've dragged this out for a really long time. I mean, we know, you know the dollar amount, and it's good for you to know. But yeah, when we put it out there and when that we're presenting this to the public, it should read properly, like you said. This is because it is a percentage of the recycling. It's not a percentage of the entire trash bill. That is already being taken care of in the CPI. So it is not transparent, and it does look like we're trying to hide something. And because it will be over 5%, we will be having a public hearing, and so maybe nobody will show up, so maybe nothing. But regardless, we want to have the numbers reflect the way that they truly are.
Thank you.
We had a $130 million budget last night, and nobody had comment.
Members of the commission, again, comments are definitely appropriate. Motions would be good. Motions could be to go ahead and consider this, consider it after resolution of amendment issues. You could request that amendment issues be resolved before you consider it, but that would definitely put this out of step with the previous changes. But members of the commission, comments or motions?
Mr. Chairman, or to get my head clear, this has been quite an experience. Are we talking about 63 cents, which will not assure recycling in the city of Meridian? Or are we talking about 78 cents, which will assure curbside recycling in Meridian? Because both of those numbers have been mentioned in the last minute. So I think we're talking about 78 cents per month per household, which will assure that curbside recycling continues in the city of Meridian. Am I right?
The answer to that question is that depends on the motion that is made. But you do have a very good point about that, that as the motion is constructed, the difference between those two numbers includes that issue.
Guarantee an amendment.
And also, what would it be for commercial? What is did you calculate the adjustment to commercial to keep it going?
71 cents, because no franchise on it.
So
And
in
I
other
would-
words,
I
staff
would-
is recommending 56 cents, but I don't know what your
So-
response is.
So the answer to the question as I presented is it's 76 cents per commercial yard. You make the same concession on the franchise fee, now you're taking a nickel off of it. So you're 71 cents for commercial yard, we're at 78 cents for residential per household per month.
Mr. Chair, sorry to ask a question so the staff is clear. It sounds like what I'm hearing is there's a request from Republic to, one, ensure that there's a conversation about the franchise fee, how that's handled. There's a conversation about the 15 cents and how that's handled. And the 78 cents is currently the 63 cents plus the 15-cent processing fee. There would also need to be a discussion about how the franchise component is handled. Do I understand that correctly?
I think rather specifically at this particular point would be if the motion were made and it were to follow staff's recommendation, 63 cents for residential and 56 cents for commercial, that would be one motion. And as embedded within that motion, there are no guarantees going forward as to whether material would actually be received at the mills for recycling versus whether it would be taken up to the landfill for disposal. On the other hand, if the numbers were 78 cents for residential and 71 cents per yard for commercial, then Republic has granted that would guarantee that the material got delivered to the mills and would not be going to the landfill. So, so it is the 15-cent component. If that's included in the motion, then that would define how far we're going for delivery of the materials. Within that conversation, the franchise fee is not discussed.
Just want to make sure that's clear.
And it needs to be when the motion is made that we'll make sure that the members of the commission know what they're voting on.
Waiting for Dave to finish writing his motion.
I'm struggling here.
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm troubled that there's such a difference in viewpoint as to whether or not the contract, this recycling processing fee is within or outside the contract. I find that really troubling. There's been national coverage wherein Republic Services at the national corporate level has stated that they recognize contract impacts, that they've been coming through cities and discussing it where it needed to be discussed and negotiated. And I think for me, that's the partnership, the customer service that Meridian expects and we have received, and I hope we will receive it. I don't think this is appropriate for this commission to be put in this position after, at this point in time, so close to when we need to keep the timeline moving forward to get to City Council to make important decisions about rates for our customers. Sure. So I'm putting that to you and for comment.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Again, due to my ignorance, when did Republic Services first approach this committee with this issue?
The issue was brought to the attention of the city in a March 2018 letter addressed to the mayor.
And it wasn't discussed previously to that?
Not presented the way it was as a I don't know, Rochelle, you can speak to that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Don, we'd actually been discussing this. It started with the Ada County SWAC back in July of last year, and then it was carried forward. And it was a discussion at this level and discussion at with the mayor in February of this year. And she asked us to bring forward options and what it would take to address this issue in the city of Meridian to keep the program moving forward. And we brought the first proposal forward in March, but the discussion of National Sword or China Sword had been going on since last fall, and it stemmed largely around Boise's energy bag adoption to address the plastics. But the conversation had been going since November, December. It was brought forward here on several occasions, but not for any action other than in February we talked to the mayor, and then March we brought forward the proposal that we needed to have a solution in place right away. So at that time we were worried about how we were going to fund it until October. And so we were looking for a resolution much quicker and than even October. So it is not a new discussion. Today's recommendation that this is to keep recycling moving forward. The longer we wait, we can't continue to suffer losses. We feel like we've been really good partners. We've covered the downside of this exclusively for a long, long time, and so it's beyond what we can sustain. And so we've brought solutions forward. We think this 78 cents is really reasonable, and that's up to SWAC to decide. I mean, I think we've provided all the data that David has asked for. We've given opened up and given him everything. Rodney is going to break out if to clarify this one chart for the public hearing. Rodney said he'll bring forward those numbers so David can break out the percentages much more accurately. It doesn't change the global number that we're requesting, but it does bring clarity to it. So I'm not sure if more data and more time will change it. And I think that we've been tremendous partners. I don't say it very often, but I think that we've really covered that spread for a long time, and looking forward to some support at this point in time if you want to keep recycling. Again, we're policy neutral. I mean, we would love to see recycling happen and continue, but we're not bent on it. If it's a huge disposal fee continuing in the next year, we just can't do it.
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, with that being said, and again, being new into the role, it sounds as though that it has been a discussion for some time. So I would push that to delay any further would not be in the spirit of partnership.
And my question was about the contract. What's troubling is that when Republic Services took the assignment of the SSC contract, you inherited 100% of the net cost of recycling contractually. So I'm not asking for data. And
the 80-20 split was already in there, and
that was for the net profit.
That was for the net profit. And then Steve, and I know David broke out one quote, but Steve Sedlicek did say if China ever shut its doors, he was talking about market adjustments, not a total market collapse. He alluded to that then. He said if China ever shut its doors, it would be a market collapse. And I know that that wasn't a quote in here, and we talked about market sways and market adjustments, and we're all in. And that's why we covered this for so long, because the market does adjust. This is a 100% global market collapse, and it's not going to recover. I mean, there's no indication. I know David said it could go up or down. There's no indication that it will ever turn around. So we have to address it like it is right now as a total collapse moving forward. So that's something to consider.
So it does impact the contract you have with the City of Meridian, or it doesn't? I think we need clarity on this.
It absolutely does. And I met with Dale Bolthouse and David Miles, and they said, we need to adjust this contract. We have to open up and look at a lot of issues, because nobody had a crystal ball back then. Nobody in that contract ever foresaw multiple things that need to be changed. And we said yes, like bringing Western in as a municipal partner of yours. Or we have lots of things. We did say yes. Let's go to everyone's wish list and bring it in and update that contract and make it healthy for both sides. Absolutely.
Thank you, Rochelle. Then I would like to have the commission consider a motion along those lines. I do think contract needs to be dealt with before we can get into the dollars and cents of this particular fee. And I'm not convinced how long that would take. So, I mean, it's one thing for one side to say, yes, it needs a contract amendment, and it's another side what you might or might not agree to, and how much you want to get into the contract. I mean, that's a big issue, and I think the City and Republic Services staff needs to address that, the contract, before we can actually get to this issue.
Mr.
Councilwoman, and I reserve the right to ask you a question after you make your comment.
So, just listening, finding this very frustrating, and I'm not pointing fingers at you, don't get this wrong, but we had a conversation many months ago about adjusting the contract. So there has been plenty of time to discuss and get this stuff done. We told Republic Services, wait until the CPI. We told them in March, we're not going to do that. We want you to do it at the same time. That was us. Now they're bringing it to us at the same time, and we're saying, no, we don't want to do it. And I think that's completely disrespectful. I think that we do need to move forward and make a decision. Now, there could be some other language in the motion that says we're going to recommend the 78 cents, because I, for one, want to make sure that my recycling that I'm working on every week goes to the recycling and not to the landfill. I would like that guarantee, and I think most of the citizens in the Meridian would like to know that their recycling is going to the recycling, getting recycled. But you can add something like, we're going to recommend this effective October 1st. In the meantime, we're going to open up the contract and work on it and get this taken care of once and for all. I mean, we've been talking about this for almost a year, it seems, and there's been ample time. Anyway.
And I agree. I agree. That's why I started my comments with I'm troubled. I'm troubled to hear the difference of opinions. And now, Rochelle, you kind of have come to say it does involve the contract, which is good. But I was just really troubled by the tenor of Rodney's letter saying it's within the contract. Staff is saying it's not. I think there has been time. I wasn't part of the process, but I was expecting to see more of a partnership in that we're under the same contract. There shouldn't be this kind of disparity in it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
and obviously there's a difference of opinion on the contract language, and our attorneys and the city's attorneys are probably do have a different opinion. The tone of the letter from me was because I had to basically draw a line, because this has been going on for some time. Now, this is not the appropriate forum for us to discuss, our difference of opinion on the contract. It is appropriate for us to state that we are willing to open the contract and negotiate certain aspects of it where it is confusing, where it does lack transparency. Absolutely, and more than happy to do that and make that commitment.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Councilwoman.
and I don't know if it would be appropriate for this group, but maybe this is where a subcommittee needs to be formed to work with legal and, or at least, talk about that. Or maybe it's just strictly between Republic and legal. I don't know. Set a date. Let's get this done. Let's just stop talking about it. So every month we don't come here and have an hour-long conversation about adjusting the contract someday. Anyway, did you want to ask me something?
Yes, Councilwoman, do you think that it would be my reading of our charter that when the amendments are put together, that council would want our opinion on what those amendments?
Probably. It's not something that happens a whole lot. So,
Which is to just say that I recognize the fact that that further complicates the conversation we're having at this point, but
it gives time. So if your motion says that we want to do this, and along with that, we're also going to do this, and then you have some time, not a lot of time, and that's the only reason I say subcommittee is because you guys only get together once a month as a body, but you've got a little bit of time to figure those things out, get with legal, get them. It shouldn't have to take that long. That doesn't mean that it won't. If you all know what you want in there, we want it at the annual review and keeping it separate from the CPI, and we want it on a separate rate. What else is there? There may be one or two more things. It's really not that complicated, I don't think, as an amendment.
Would you be on the subcommittee?
Yeah, I'll be on the subcommittee there. If that's the way you want to go. You might not want me. I get too hot. Too excited and passionate.
Mr. Chair, I also agree that we've been talking about this in good faith for the better part of the year. I'd like to make some progress where possible. If we had to do a subcommittee, that's one thing, but I don't know what conversations happen between staff in the month. So I don't know if there's some confusion I don't know about. But I would like to proceed with a motion of some sort that'll get us with the 70, the option that allows us to recycle with the 78 cents residential and the 71 cents commercial to be move forward to council. And anything that needs to be separated as far as franchise fees and potentially a subcommittee, if we can do a better job of wrapping up the question between now and whatever needs to happen. I think we should move forward as much as we can of what's been discussed and all this data now. And whatever people have heartburn, if we can separate that out. But I really do need to go soon.
Mr. Chair, real quick. So I have a question. This is more for Andrea, I think. Might be. Does this have to be an annual thing? Can you make a motion that says for 90 days we're going to do this, and within this 90 days we are going to amend the contract, and then this can all be reflected in there, and then you can do it for another 9 months or whatever to get it? I don't know if that's. Does it have to be annual for city stuff like that?
Well, you can agree to anything you want, right? But we have a contract, and we have an annual rate process, review process. I guess I could consider Commissioner Nelson's motion if we, based on something you said earlier, that it would be, and I'm only interested in what you've represented will allow us to continue recycling. So I think there has to be consideration of that. So I kind of want clarification if it's 78 cents, and was that for residential? 71 cents for commercial yard?
Commercial per yard.
Okay. With the clarification of doesn't include the CPI or the franchise fee, and it's subject to contract amendment to be approved by council prior to it being effective. So in other words, the contract should be, that amendment to the contract needs to get approved in order to make these figures, this processing fee effective. And I would like to recommend that it occurs so that it's effective 10/1/2018. So it goes forward with the CPI rate adjustment, so that there's one public hearing, so that there's one billing bump for customers, but there's greater transparency because recycling collection service will be called out and what it is, and the processing fee. With that, I could consider that a motion that might try and wrap this up for SWAC.
Right. And Mr. Chair, one more thing, and add, and even though it's been said, but it just should be in the motion so it goes to council that way, maybe that guarantees that all recycling goes to the MRF and to the landfill. That's the reason for that increase.
So that's a little tricky because Republic Services can deliver it to the MRF, but the MRF can choose to call mixed paper contamination and take to the, and bill us again to.
It's recycled.
So how can you make that guarantee?
So, Mr. Chair, we cannot make that guarantee. The guarantee that we can make is that all recycling collected in Meridian will be delivered to the MRF.
That's your contract. You have to do that.
And that's again, that's all the only commitment I can make if the MRF.
Mr. Chairman and Don, to add to that, though, we have been asking Western Recycling for guarantees in writing that the material is being recycled. So they have been giving us those. So we can continue to get those because we've been worried that exactly that. So we've been asking for those and we have been getting those.
And we can get that from them when we get the contract with them as well. So.
Yeah.
So just say.
Making his head spin. He's writing it down.
I'm done.
I'm going to make a stab at a motion. I'd like to move that we move forward with recycling as a separate line item based on the 78 cents for residential per yard, 71 cents commercial per yard, with the exclusion of the CPI and franchise fees, with the intent that the recycling go to the MRF, the intent for recycling, in addition to adding an amendment to review those costs annually. Your adjustments that are coming.
Just that it would include a contract amendment prior to an approved contract amendment prior to the rate that you just enumerated becoming effective.
10-1 in there.
And with the goal being to achieve that by 10/1/2018.
I accept her additions as stated.
I wrote them as fast as I could.
And one suggested change would be the 78 cents per household per month.
Not yard.
On the residential.
Thank you.
Different definition of yard. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. And I probably should have done this before. Move forward is, let me get a little bit more clarified, that we are recommending this to the council for consideration. And then so the second part of that statement on this thing is, are you neutral or are you recommending approval or not recommending approval? I mean,
recommending approval.
Recommending approval. So that it be moved forward to council for consideration with the due pass consideration. Okay. Comments?
Yes.
By commissioners or questions?
So does SWAC bring that forward, or does staff, if it's approved, if it passes here?
Well, and David, I would certainly offer at this particular point, this is all subject to the amendment process. And of course, and that will follow up on that, because clearly staff is going to have to be involved in the amendment process. At such time as it comes before City Council, I would like to be present to certainly answer questions about SWAC's process and such, whether that means we're cooperatively presenting or whether I'm in the audience to go ahead and address that. We can work out the details on that, but
Chair and Commissioner, yes, we all are welcome, and regardless of how it happens, we'll get it communicated.
And I think it's good having it on staff's shoulders, because if he doesn't get it done, he can get in trouble. I'm just kidding.
Councilwoman, do you think City Council would like an update from staff following this whenever we make a motion, or to make sure that's the direction they want to go in, or do you think they just want to get it one?
They would just want to get it when they get it. See it as a picture, the whole picture. Yeah. Otherwise it gets messy.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we would expect to present your recommendation as an action item. Certainly, you'd be there to present any additional information, as well as Republic, if they feel it's necessary that they want to present information. To Rochelle's point, we have had several and numerous communications back and forth about a lot of different issues, and we chose to keep this central around this component, and so that's what we've presented today.
members of the commission, additional comments or questions? That's considered the second request. Final request. Any comments or questions on the motion? Is everyone comfortable with the motion and they know what they're voting on? Recognizing the commission is ready for the vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? The motion passes by voice vote. Thank you. And unless there be any doubt, this commission takes its job fairly seriously.
Mr. Chair, I too now have to leave fairly quickly, so I would beg forgiveness from Conrad if he's still here. And
No, he left.
he had to leave too, yeah, and we'll move that item forward to the next agenda.
I think it's necessary. We've held you here for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and we only asked 1 hour, so you've, once again.
Time and a half, maybe.
And
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I throw a few action items, or I guess Commissioner Pogue, on the next agenda? I'd love to give an update on the curbside glass, like how many people have ordered, when carts are going out, sample materials if you want to see them. And then we gave bikes to 3 different public works, or City Hall and the Water Department and wastewater treatment facility for I was going to see if I could get an update on how many people are riding those, or if they're using them at all, or if they're just staying in their lockers. And I had one other thing, but I can't remember it.
As always, if there are additional items, get them to myself or to Andrea, and we'll add them to the schedule for formalities purposes. Then item 5B3, Republic Services FY18 second quarter reports will be continued till next month. The next meeting is
Oh, that's the wrong date.
September 26th.
26th.
And with that, we've completed the business that's on our agenda. Thank you so much, and we will see you next month.
Enjoy the Grand Illusion.
As I have to rush to it too.